give a briefing to us on the FY23 year-end financial highlights, and since that's not important, you can present it to less than a quorum of this committee. I'm kidding, Greg, of course. So, Greg, why don't you go ahead?
It's my pleasure. I'll do my best to keep eyes from glazing over.
And maybe you should speak slowly.
I'll make an attempt. So, good morning, Chair Durrett, Vice Chair Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the Business Management Committee. It is my pleasure to present to you the end-of-year performance financial highlights for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023. An important thing to keep in mind as we review the slides is that the figures here presented are preliminary unaudited figures and are subject to change based on audit results. Next slide, please. All right, we'll start with a review of the operating budget performance. Our revenues were $28.6 million favorable, and expenses were $3.8 million favorable to budget, with a net actual surplus of $97.6 million, which is $32.4 million better than we had budgeted for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Taking a deeper look at the end-of-year revenues and expenses by category, I'll start with the revenue side. The combination of sales tax and ad valorem tax revenues were $13.8 million above budget. As you probably heard in some of our previously quarterly updates, this is the result of both great economic conditions in the Atlanta area and the impact of inflation on the price of goods and services. You'll also notice that COVID relief funds associated with the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARP, are $1.8 million unfavorable to budget. This is due to the timing of drawdowns. Last fiscal year, 2022, we drew down slightly more than we had anticipated by the end of the fiscal year, and that was after the 23 budget was approved. So the total value of the American Rescue Plan Act has been drawn down now, and so we were able to fully consume that. The great news story of the year is our passenger revenue, which came in $5.3 million above favorable to budget, about 7.9% favorable. While we have not returned back to our pre-pandemic ridership yet, we are encouraged by the performance that's been above the forecast. Rounding out the revenues, other revenues were favorable to budget by $9.1 million due to a combination of the alternative fuel rebate. We did not originally budget for the fiscal year at a conservative estimate, and also the investment interest on our reserve balances due to the high interest rates available right now. Moving on to the expenses side, we experienced favorable balances in salaries and wages and total benefits, largely due to the higher vacancy rates we carried throughout the fiscal year. Combined, these represented $44.7 million favorable and actuals to budget. That said, we did make significant progress in filling vacant positions, as we started the year with 789 vacant positions and ended it with 519. Overtime was unfavorable to budget by $3.5 million. The combination of the high vacancies and scheduled overtime were the primary drivers behind that result. Other non-labor was unfavorable to budget by $5.4 million, primarily due to the increases in casualty and liability reserves across the fiscal year. Finally, I want to point out the unfavorable result from the capital allocation. The capital charges allocation represents direct and indirect labor associated with the capital program, based on the understanding that that work is in support of the capital projects. Since spending on the capital program was lower than forecasted, fewer charges were allocated over to the capital program this fiscal year. Since it's a zero-sum relationship, the funding ultimately comes from the same source, so if we didn't have enough capital allocation charges, it means we have a favorable balance in the capital program, unfavorable on the operating side. But it's kind of a net zero, is the point I want to kind of put out there. Move on to the next slide, please. Looking at June's performance specifically, we can see that net revenues were favorable to budget by $4.2 million, and net expenses were unfavorable by $1.4 million. That resulted in an actual surplus of $3.8 million compared with a budgeted surplus of $1 million. Next slide, please. Now, breaking the June results into those individual categories, we see that on the revenue side, sales tax and ad valorem revenues continue to show positive results, $800,000 favorable to budget. This is a continuation of that same strong economy and the impact of inflation. As you saw on the annual slide, the COVID stimulus revenues were unfavorable by that $1.7 million due to the advancement of those payments in 22. We just saw the results in the month of June. Other revenues came in $4 million favorable to budget due to the same increase I spoke before of interest investment income. Moving on to expenses for the month of June, salaries and wages ended the month unfavorable to budget by $900,000. This is primarily due to the fact that we had a 14-day accrual occurring at year end, and that was larger than typical and represented an entire pay period. Overtime also ended $700,000 unfavorable to budget, similar to the reasons I mentioned on the annual, which is a combination of what we still had and some vacancies and scheduled overtime. Total benefits were favorable to budget, just shy of $4 million. This is largely due to the ongoing vacancy rate authority-wide. Contractual services were unfavorable to budget by $7.8 million. This was largely due to higher than anticipated accrual of contracted services associated with paratransit services, the contracted paratransit services. We had a high accrual at the end of the year for that, as well as some of the timing of our IT software renewals and a true-up of the service contracts in IT. Combination of the things result in the unfavorable balance you see there. Sure. So in the case of the contracted paratransit services, we were expecting to get regular monthly billing on some of from the contract provider. We weren't receiving the invoices in a timely fashion, so we had to still accrue for the value that they provided and say it's functionally an earned expended amount. We just haven't paid it out yet. That's my understanding, is that we were having issues getting the timing of the billing to come in. Okay. Materials and supplies were unfavorable to budget by $1.2 million, largely due to an increase in auxiliary replacement parts and rebuilds and reparables. Lastly, our other non-labor was favorable to budget by $8.6 million due to a decrease in our injuries and liability reserve specific to the month of June. Now, that concludes my review of the operating highlights. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to the ridership key performance indicators. Next slide, please. We ended the fiscal year with passenger revenue exceeding budget by $5.3 million, as you heard me mention before. That's an overall positive story on the recovering ridership post-pandemic. The month of June, we did see revenues fall below our forecast by approximately $200,000. This did still exceed the prior June by $500,000. And as you can see from the trend line that we had in the forecast, it was more of a straight line. We will more likely have one that's adjusted for seasonality in the coming year. So you'll see that a little different. Next slide, please. All right, now before I go into detail on this slide, I do want to provide an update to the BMC that we revised the methodology on how we counted unlinked bus trips. So that change introduced adjustments to how rider counts are calculated. It removes certain automatically counted events like reboardings, where a passenger stepped back on to retrieve an item, or the bus operator stepping on and off the bus. We included this new methodology in our 2022 NTD reporting, but we didn't update the figures in 2023 until that was accepted. That was accepted fairly recently. So we revised what you see here for each month using the new methodology, which is why you are seeing here the new reflection shows us falling below the forecast by $1.4 million unlinked trips. Now, the forecast you see, the red line, that was calculated using the older methodology. So the results are using the new methodology. Forecast was the old methodology. We will be using this new methodology in the 2023 submission for NTD as well.
Hey, Greg, before you go on, help me understand the magnitude of the ridership numbers using that new methodology, because I can't imagine it being more than, a point-something%.
If I may pinch it, I'm actually going to ask Rob Goodwin to step up and help me out on this one.
So, on average, maybe a little over one boarding per trip is like a bus operator or a passenger getting on and off. So that can be anywhere up to 10, depending on how the average ridership per trip can be up to 5–10%. It's a not insignificant impact.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Chair. So how do you measure that? Help me understand this again. You say that they get on and they get off, and you don't want to measure them at one time. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right. We have automatic counters that count everyone that gets on and off the bus, regardless of whether they're riding or not.
Okay, so if they get on at the front of the bus, all right, and that's one passenger, and so then they get off the rear, no count. If they come
They're
back.
kind of getting on too.
Oh, they are kind of going off. Okay, that's what I want to know. And so are you saying that there's situations where they need to get back on the bus?
They
And
left their umbrella, let's say. So bus pulls into the station, they get off, they're counted getting off. They left something on, they get back on, they're counted getting on again, and they get back off again.
Okay,
So they're double counted as a rider getting on.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so for rail ridership, we also did miss the target for the month of June, falling slightly below the forecast by approximately 100,000 trips, but we did exceed the annual forecast by 800,000 trips. And rail performance is a big contributor to what we saw in the fare revenue. All right, next slide, please. All right, that concludes my portion of the financial highlights presentation. I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mr. Christopher Jackson, who will present the 23 year-end capital highlights. Mr. Jackson.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Jackson, the Director of Capital Budgeting, and I will present the capital portion of the financial report. Next slide, please. First, we'll start with sources and uses. As the slide that's in front of you, you'll see our budgeted amount was 426, and we actually came in at 403. Next, as we move through it, you'll see the uses as it relates to asset categories. Our budget amount for the capital for FY23, you'll see it was 512 million, and we finished at 273 with a percentage that's slightly above 50%. But if you incorporate debt services into the budget amount and the actuals, you'll see it roughly relates to 657 million and 417 as it relates to actuals. Next slide, please. The slide before you now are a list of our top 10 projects as it relates to the state of good repair. This category is led by the new rail car purchases that expense almost $38 million. Next, you'll see rail station rehab, which quite a bit of work went into. We're working on several stations: College Park, Lenox, North Avenue Airport, Arts Center, and 5 Points, which account for, we were projecting a little heavier lift, but due to economic circumstances and just resources allocations, that's why we finished where we finished with this number. We're projecting for FY24 a much more balanced approach and a closer target to the budget. Just to touch on a few more, you see escalator rehabilitation, which spent about 94% of their budget, and radio system upgrade, which accounted for about 80.7% of their budget. Next slide, please. Yes, sir.
Hey, Bill? Hey, Bill? Bill, could you hit the microphone? Thanks.
Do I have to start over? Okay.
Mr. Floyd, can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. I do have to start over then. Well, if you're looking at a project that's 62% of it has been spent, of the budget has been spent, is it on schedule or is it behind schedule by 40%? And how do we know that? And Kerry, this is probably more of a question for you then. Where do we see that? Where do we get to see that number?
So we will be presenting those when we present the capital highlights. These are the financial numbers that were reported through our system, but we do plan to come back and do a recap of the projects for the capital highlights. But when you see that the numbers may not, maybe there's 22.5% expended against the budget, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not on track for schedule, but in most cases, yes, it is not on track for schedule, or maybe the particular phase of the project is not where we anticipated it to be for that particular part of the program, but it doesn't mean the end date shifts either. So
Okay.
it's project by project.
And in your capital budget, if at the end of the fiscal year, you didn't spend, you planned on spend $100 million and you only spent 60, does 40 of that go into next year's budget?
It does. It goes into the next year's budget. However, we're still budgeting to what we have approved for FY '24. And Raj may be able to,
Yeah, thank you, if I may. The spending authority does not go away because whatever the board has approved for spending, let's say they spend only 60% of that, the other 40% of the spending authority does go into next year. That gets added to that next year's approved budget. So let's say the 24th budget is about $500 million. There's a leftover of 60 or, in my example, 40 from last year. So they can spend up to 540 in this year. So it doesn't go away.
Okay, and
On
we-
the capital side, but on the operating side, it does go away.
Yeah,
It's-
no, I'm talking just about
Yeah.
capital stuff now. So but if you make a decision that it's behind schedule, and so in the next year, you're not gonna do 100 million, you have to spend that 40 to catch up, and you're gonna have to spend maybe 60 just to get even. Do you plan for that? Or, I mean, I'm sure you do, but I'm just asking, how do we get a feeling of whether a major project like the 5 Points MARTA station is on schedule spending? Because as an ex-contractor, you have front-end loading, you bill more than what, I mean, and not always does the money be a true answer for whether the project's on schedule or not.
and that's correct. And what you're looking at here, these are all-in project budgets, so they're not necessarily a construction contractor's, budget here. This is all in. So for example, on parking lot repair, we spent 6.8 million. We had a total budget for this fiscal year of 30 million. And so that doesn't necessarily reflect the work orders that we have issued to contractors. It's also got staff time that's in there, anything else that needs to be allocated to that project. So these numbers are not necessarily an all-in measure of the particular construction project. So project by project, it's hard to describe, but project by project, you have to take into consideration not just the budget, but the schedules and the other pieces and the number of contracts that are going into it.
Okay, now these are project by project numbers, correct?
No, they're not. So those there are contract by contract. So the prime contractor that you're looking at in those, they're reporting against those DBE numbers. So one prime contractor in that pamphlet that you're looking at could be working on multiple projects here.
Okay, all right. I don't think I'm smart enough to understand all that you said, but I have a better idea now. Thank you.
Bill, if you stay after class, the teacher will work with you. Mr. Jackson, you made a comment a little while ago saying next fiscal year, the one we're in right now,
Yes, sir.
we expect to perform better than this in terms of getting closer to the budgeted amount. Is that because, Carrie, earlier you introduced me to the AGM of CPMO, and you were very happy to have her on board, and maybe this is a time to introduce her, but we're getting the capacity to be able to deliver more this fiscal year.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and I do want to introduce Latika Washington. She is our new AGM of the Centralized Program Management Office, and we're really happy to have her. She comes from Indigo, and she just started with us the beginning of last week, so we're really happy to have her. Part of what we've been trying to do over the last, since I took on this role in February officially, is work with each of the departments and the divisions and making sure that what they have for budget, that they have a plan in place on how they're going to spend it. So you'll notice from our budget call documents, we've been a lot more deliberate about asking them, what contracts do you have existing? What are you going to be going out and soliciting for? What are you planning to spend your money? And tell us over the year when you plan to actually write the checks for it. And we've been doing a series of meetings with all of the groups to review what is in their FY24 budgets and kind of right-size those. So that's been a significant effort that Chris and his team have been putting forth and Latika will be taking that on as well, is just to sit with everybody and make sure they have a really good, solid plan to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, if I might, it's encouraging to see you all talking about this, and I think one of the things is for us to understand the amount of work that's going on between the construction work and the keeping score, if you will, on what's being spent and how it's going in. And unfortunately for you all, you've got to dumb it down enough to where we can understand it and look at it and make some sense out of it. And I realize that that's a bigger problem than maybe, I mean, trying to get all this work done and listen to us complain about it's not on schedule or you're not telling us enough is one issue. Actually doing it is another issue. So anyway, I'm glad to see this, and I think it seems to me that you're getting a little better handle, Kerry, on what you're doing. At least you're convincing me that you're doing that. So, thank you.
Bill, if I can just jump in on that, your point is well taken, and it's not a waste of time. It is this combination of doing the work and analyzing the work, being able to report out on the work that's making the difference for this team that you have in front of you. And so, yeah, MARTA's always had a lot of work to do, and at any given time the lens appears busy, but we're now getting our arms around the totality of the work and learning how to analyze, project, and sort through the work in a way that we can actually report it. Because if we can't make it make sense to you, then we're probably missing something. So it's working.
Jim,
That's a great point. Hey, Al.
I was going to bring this up later, but I think now's a good time. Schedules and construction dollars spent don't necessarily match up the same. But I go back to the schedules, time, and budget, and we brought in the CPMO team several years back, and there've been discussions going back from a year and a half about getting a very simple chart on saying, here are a list of projects that we have a dedicated funding stream for construction.
Okay.
And that should be very simple to do. And I think the board would like to see that. I look at the rail rehabilitation program. All of those contracts are construction management at risk. We should have a schedule and budget contractually for those. So I'm not looking for 50 projects here, but I think you have somewhere between 20 and 30 projects that we have dedicated construction funding, and we should be able to get from the CPO team a very simple chart, one-liner that says this is where we are schedule-wise and budget-wise, and not try to create 1,000 steps to get to that answer. So I think it's time for the CPO team to provide that, Collie. So.
Okay. Yes, sir. We'll make sure you have that information. I made note of it. Any more questions? Next slide, please. Here is another sources and uses slide where if you look at the budget numbers as it relates to actuals, you see our budget amount was 42.6, and the actuals were 4.3, which are a little greater than the budgeted amount. Right below the sources and uses, you'll see as it relates to non-assets, the actuals were 19.3, and the budgeted amount was 54.4. Next slide, please. Now, this next slide speaks to MARTA City of Atlanta expansion and our expenditures against these particular projects as they're listed in sequential order as the greatest spend of actuals. Leading the charges, you'll see 5 Points Transformation, which budgeted amount was $6 million. We spent roughly 4.8. If we come down a little further, we'll see in a sequential order some of the top spenders. Clifton Corridor comes in at 2.3. You see we spent expense funds on Bankhead at 1.1. Our budget amount was 4.5, with total expenditures for the MARTA program of the list of projects before you, 20.1 as it relates to a budget of fiscal year budget of 44 million. Any questions? Next slide, please. The slide before you is another sources and uses that speaks of how we expended the funds as it relates to our budgeted amount. as it relates to actuals, our budget amount was 36.0, and we exceeded our budget amount slightly by 1.1. In the non-asset category, our budget amount, we performed slightly below what we had budgeted, 4.1 as it relates to 8.5. Next slide, please. The slide before you now are a list of our top performers as it relates to the Clayton County projects. This list is led by the Clayton County 54 BRT route. The actuals were 1.7, as you see, which exceeded the budget amount for 1.5 because we put a lot of work in this project is moving forward. Just to go down the list a little further, you'll see our Clayton County multi-purpose facility that we purchased. We expensed 0.7 against a $3 million budget, with a total of the top projects. Our expenses were 4.1 against a budget of 7.6. Next slide. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Are there any further questions?
I have a question about,
Use your microphone.
I have a question about passenger revenue, was up. Do we differentiate between special events ridership and normal day ridership? We don't do that, do we?
I mean, revenues are revenues. We do not separately count revenues for special events, no. I mean, ridership, of course, we track. I think almost every day we track our ridership. But overall revenues include revenues from special events as well.
We do an analysis on a case-by-case, month-by-month basis. If we have an acute spike in the ridership numbers, we'll look at that and say, well, what is that? So Rob and his team are always able to look back, and with the granularity of if I say, why is this June performing not as well as, last June, and it might be, when schools went out, it might be a month that we had an extra work day, in the month. One of them fell on a Saturday this year as opposed to a Friday last year. So that level of granularity is there, but on a reporting basis, its ridership is all one big category.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is that we need to, for special events like that, we need a way to charge more if you're gonna ride the train. I mean, those Georgia people who go down there for the SEC championship every year, they ought to have to pay $20 to ride the train down there. And $20 back. It ought to be, they ought to have to pay more for that.
This might be one of the times when you should press the microphone.
Bill, did you go to Georgia Tech? Oh, okay, just. Any other questions for Greg? Greg, thanks a bunch.
Thank you all.
All right. We have a quorum, so let us go to the top of the agenda, and I will entertain a motion. Oh, are we calling the meeting to order now, or, okay. The Business Management Committee meeting for today begins. So, item number 1 is approval of the minutes from July's meeting. I'll entertain a motion. Properly moved and seconded. Any corrections or additions? Then let's go ahead and vote for, against, or abstaining. Are we good? Oh, Ms. Powers, did you vote? Okay. You'll let it show that okay, it's passed. All right, item 2 on the agenda is a resolution. By the way, it seems to me we should title this committee the Committee on Relatively Boring and Not Exciting Stuff when you look at those things there. So, Paula, I'm not casting aspersions on the importance of what you're going to talk about, but if you read this stuff, it's not very much like,
With exceptions.
we're going to build things, we're going to carry passengers and all that kind of stuff. Instead, we're going to talk about entertain a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of MARTA's Mystery Customer Program, RFP, P50370. Paula, how do you like that introduction?
I'll try my best to keep you all awake. Good morning, Mr. Durrett, Ms. Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the MARTA board. I'm Paula Nash, and I am the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And today I'm before you requesting a resolution authorizing the solicitations of proposals for the Mystery Customer Program, RFP P50370. Next slide, please. So the Mystery Customer Program is a tool that we use where we hire a company and we have them have their staff ride MARTA's system, but they are mystery customers. Nobody realizes that they're out there riding it to do a job for us. And that job is they are monitoring the authorities' compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Through the program, we evaluate the performance of our frontline employees as well as performance of our equipment. So just to give a little historical background, this particular program initiated when MARTA was under a consent decree for violations of the ADA. We're out from up under that consent decree now, but of course we want to make sure that we are monitoring our compliance with the ADA. A consent decree. Next slide, please. So the goals of this program are to evaluate the performance and behavior of our frontline employees in meeting customer expectations and complying with the mandates of the ADA. Also, we want to make sure that we're delivering courteous and reliable service for all of our patrons, but we do focus mostly on the seniors and the individuals with disabilities. We also evaluate the equipment, and by that I mean we look at the wheelchair or mobility aid securement systems. That's one of the things that they evaluate. They listen to announcements and make sure that our automated systems are working properly. And if they aren't working properly, they're also taking notes as to whether the operators are making those announcements. They look at things such as the ramps on our mobility vans, and they look at stuff like signage to make sure that the signage, whether it's on our bus, whether it's on our rail cars, or in the stations, is the correct signage. And we look at the elevators as well, making sure that they are working properly for our disabled community. We also focus on, well, I want to say, although we focus on ADA compliance, I want to ensure you that what we do isn't the monitoring of our normal rule and safety or supervisory monitoring that happens out there on the system daily. This isn't taking the place of that. This is really a focus on the ADA. But at the same time, if our mystery customers do see something that's a safety violation, or they see discourteous frontline employees, they do make a note of that in their document where they are monitoring. And lastly, we do assist management in pinpointing problems as well as opportunities for improvement. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits that we've gotten in the past from this program is that it helps to identify opportunities where we can retrain employees. And some of this has been in the securement of wheelchairs or mobility aid devices. Sometimes we realize through this program that there are employees that need some retraining on how to properly do those devices, as well as making sure that they're making announcements if the automated system is not working. This program also identifies which buses or rail cars have malfunctioning automated announcement systems, and that information is provided to our system health monitoring and route management team so that they can actually use this data to pinpoint which cars or which buses are having those issues. And this is very important because sometimes it's not that the automated system isn't working, but it may be that the announcement is pinging at the wrong time. So if a vision impaired individual is on our bus and the announcement pings after it's passed the stop or as it's passing the stop, that individual has now missed their stop. So we want to make sure that it's actually pinging at the right place. And then we use this program to also provide the information to the Customer Information Center. That data that they use for their KPIs comes largely from the information that we're getting from the Mystery Customer Program. And of course, it demonstrates MARTA's commitment to the ADA compliance. We actually go over these reports with our MAC committee. Next slide, please. So the solicitation details are the contract term will be 1 year with 4 one-year options. What we require are 200 rides per quarter, and that's a combination of bus, rail, and mobility. The contractor will provide reports to us, and there's a combination of different reports that they provide. They will provide individual reports from the shops that they do, and they provide that to us immediately after the shop so that we know if there's a problem, we know that right away. We send those individual shops to operations so that they are aware of any problems. They also provide a monthly report which has a lot of our KPI data in it that we use. And then there's a comprehensive quarterly report that's provided. The shoppers, we asked the contractor to make sure that most of the shoppers are part of the disabled or elderly community. So that they actually fit in and that individuals, our operators aren't aware that they are mystery shoppers out there taking notes and making assessments. And then last, we select the routes randomly, and we use both peak times and non-peak times. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. I respectfully request a resolution authorizing solicitation of requests for proposals for the Mystery Customer Program RFP P50370. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Entertain a motion and a second for the resolution.
Chairman, I'll move approval, and it was not boring at all.
Thank you so much.
Properly moved and seconded. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I do have one question. Good morning, Paula.
Yes, ma'am.
In the past, how have we scored in the past with the Mystery Shopper Program?
So it varies. We started out, because it's been going on for a long time since we were up under the consent decree. We started out shaky, but in the last few years, we've scored pretty well. And we're able to, based on the reports that we get, we're able to even break it down to as far as if there's a certain issue with just a particular garage, that we can pinpoint that garage and get that information out to operations.
And do you often, I guess, provide insight or, I guess, use the strategy of deploying the mystery shoppers based on feedback that we get from our riders, or things that you've heard from staff?
Exactly. We do it based on the feedback that we get. We do deploy them based on that, along with the random deployment. But sometimes even when we notice things like recently we noticed, our operations noticed a uptick in the number of complaints from our station against our station agents. So sometimes we redeploy them to interact more with the station agents to just see what type of interaction that they're having, because even though it focuses on our buses, trains, and mobility, we start a lot of their interactions will start with customer service and calling and trying to get information on how to do a ride, and it'll go all the way through the station so that they'll sometimes interact with our station agents as well.
Thank you.
Bill, do you have a question? Okay. Rita.
Yes. First of all, this is exciting because I certainly believe in supporting our customers. And you mentioned the MAC committee, and there is a gentleman that is a member of the MAC committee this term who is sight impaired. And so he has offered a lot of insights. Will the mystery, I started to say shopper, but rider, will the mystery rider also look at the Braille information that those that are sight impaired may have access to when entering into a train station? I've heard that to be a concern at some of the MAC meetings.
Okay. And I can't remember if that's on the checklist, but we're at the point now where we're truly redoing the scope. And so I definitely will make sure that that is on the checklist that they have.
Thank you.
Yes.
Frida.
Thank you, Paula. This was interesting. I like to think that all the board members are secret shoppers too, because when we're out, I'm sure you hear from us.
Yes.
I know I'm pretty good about letting you know when I find things. So I appreciate that. And you know,
We do
the
too.
more ears and eyes that can be out on the system, the better our system can be. Are we spending a little bit of time talking about the bathrooms and making sure, because I know that's just a bone of contention no matter where, what station. So as they secret shop, do they also look at the whole restroom situation?
I actually don't think the restroom situation is on the past report, but like I said, we are going through the scope now, and I will definitely add that as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Might make it more expensive, Frida, but sorry. Any other questions? I don't see anything, so let's go ahead and vote for the resolution. The resolution passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Welcome, Mr. Chair. Donna Jennings, you are up to talk about how we're going to manage our risk and consider a resolution authorizing the renewal of privacy and network security cyber liability insurance coverage.
Good morning, Chairman Durrett. Thank you for that introduction. And it's insurance, so sorry, y'all. It's not how exciting I can make it. Good morning, Chairman Durrett, Vice Chair Williamson, Mr. Srinath, Mr. Greenwood, and members of the committee. I'm here today to request authorization to renew the authority's network security and privacy liability insurance coverage for a period of 1 year from October 1, 2023 to 2024. Next slide, please. The purpose of my presentation is to provide the committee with an understanding of the basics of cyber insurance coverage, to provide a high-level overview of the current state of the cyber insurance market, and to discuss recommendations for the renewal policy. Next slide, please. Moving on to the basics of cyber insurance, let's discuss exactly what privacy and network security liability, or again, cyber insurance coverage, actually provides coverage for. It's a bit unusual in that in the same policy it provides coverage for both first-party and third-party costs associated with an incident. First-party coverage is for the policyholder and covers expenses that we would incur as a result of a cyber attack on our networks. Examples of these first-party costs that would be covered by the policy include the following: communicating with affected customers, providing credit monitoring services to customers, executing public relations and reputation management campaigns, forensic services to identify the nature and extent of a breach, digital data recovery, and network extortion. third-party coverages for claims for monetary damages made against the authority as a result of a cyber incident, and would include regulatory defense cost and payment card industry or PCI fines and penalties. So the policy provides a variety of methods for mitigating the ultimate cost of a cyber event to the authority. Next slide, please. So now we'll go over a snapshot of the cyber insurance market today. First, catastrophic risk is in the form of aggregation exposure, and supply chain risk is top of mind for insurers as cyber risks stem from common vulnerabilities in hardware and software, as well as common dependencies from digital supply chain vendors like cloud service providers. Geopolitical tensions are driving uncertainty in the market as insurers look to determine how cyber insurance responds to scenarios out of conflict and war. And second, privacy regulations such as General Data Protection Regulation or GDPR and many others continue to expand, and the size of the fines are a significant concern for both insureds and insurers. And finally, the evolution of ransomware attacks continue to increase in severity and sophistication. Data encryption and business interruption continue to be most impactful for all organizations, and data theft occurred in over 75% of ransomware events, leading to other losses such as Privacy Act violations. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit about our renewal activities for the new policy year. We began our renewal discussions with our internal partners and insurance brokers in June. We worked closely with our CISO and IT teams to update the MARSH cyber self-assessment tool that we utilized for the first time last year. Without going into the specific details, this assessment tool evaluates an organization's cybersecurity maturity based on our responses to questions about the top 12 controls that need to be in place at an organization for an insurance carrier to even consider our application for coverage. Some of the controls include use of multi-factor authentication, cybersecurity awareness and phishing testing, and cyber incident response planning and testing. Our score on the tool improved from last year, which demonstrates that our controls are getting stronger. Next slide, please. So now we'll move on to my recommendations for the new policy. The current policy has a self-insured retention of $1 million, limits of $6.5 million, and the expiring policy cost $414,000, and the expiration date is September 15th of 2023. Despite the challenges to the marketplace, the cost of coverage is finally stabilizing after rapid changes over the last 3 to 4 years. We even have new insurance carriers that are coming into the market space. And as a result of this cost stabilization, I recommend that we attempt to increase our limits from $6.5 million to $10 million. I also recommend that we move the effective date of the policy from the middle of September to October 1, as it just makes more sense to have the policy renew at the beginning of a month. The cost of that 2-week extension is $14,400, and the total not to exceed cost for increasing the limits to $10 million is $744,600, which would result in an increase in cost from the expiring policy of $345,000. Please note that this not to exceed cost is a very conservative number, and our goal during our negotiations is to drive down the cost as much as possible. Now I respectfully request the committee's approval of this resolution to renew the authority's cyber liability insurance coverage for a total not to exceed cost of $759,000 for the policy period of October 1, 2023 to 2024. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Could I have a motion and a second to approve this resolution? Properly moved and seconded. Are there questions for Donna? I do have one. So
Yes, sir.
Marsh has gone out there and sort of assessed the marketplace and identified, yeah, we've got carriers that are going to respond to this.
Yes, sir.
When we approve this, then Marsh goes into work, and then we will then negotiate to try to get the best deal with the best carrier for whatever element of this. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, they're out in the marketplace now as we
Right.
speak, so that's why we come with a not to exceed number, so then we get the quotes back, and then we evaluate which carrier is going to give us the best price and coverage terms and conditions at that time.
Thank you. Rod Frierson.
Yes, is there a reason why we only do this on a yearly basis? That somehow we can extend it more than?
No, sir, they do not offer multiple year policies for cyber liability insurance coverage.
I do not? Okay.
Nope.
And you also mentioned that additional $345,000 for, is that to increase the coverage from 6.5 million to 10, or?
Yes,
is
sir.
this a cost? Okay.
Yes,
all
sir.
right.
That would be the highest level. Hopefully, we can drive it down, but that would
Right.
be the most additional that we would spend, with that's 700,000, yes.
And so, when these situations occur, does it matter how much we get to file against this policy? Say, for instance, if it's something that does occur and the cost of it is 500,000, we still will file anything that's involved in this breach against this policy? Is that?
Yes, sir, it does have a $1 million retention, so if it was a
Okay.
$500,000 loss, that would be below the retention, so we
Alright.
would not actually make a claim, but we would provide that information to the insurance carriers on a go-forward basis when we do renew the policy.
Okay,
So,
so our responsibility be for the first million?
yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, that's my question. The $1 million self-insured is a lot of money.
Yes, sir.
Obviously. Is that a per year thing, or is that a per event thing?
That's a per occurrence.
Per occurrence? So
Yes,
you
sir.
could have $5 million worth of claims that we paid for
Correct.
in 1 year if you had 5 different claims.
Correct.
Why is that so high? And before you answer that, I'm wondering what the risk is for claims over $1 million. And how do we assess that risk?
From the standpoint of the retention itself, a lot of time, most of the time in the marketplace that we're in, that's really the lowest that the insurance carriers will go. We're, as a public entity, we are a specific type of risk, and there's different things that they look at with different types of companies, and so that's the retention that we can get. We can certainly try to lower it, but that costs money. So it doesn't make sense for us to trade money with the insurance carrier to lower our retention. Number one, we haven't had any losses. And number two, that might not be available in the marketplace. So there's a number of competing factors that go into that decision to figure out what's the best way to deploy that capital.
Yeah, I don't understand enough about this, but it just seems to me like the risk is greater for us to spend millions of dollars plus this premium before we ever even get into the policy. And I'm not sure that I understand where the risk is in this policy.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could help.
Kirk?
So when you have a cyber incident where this policy gets triggered, the chances of the $1 million being all we're spending is pretty low. These are not the type of incidents where you have, one person who's affected and, that's it. Those cases, we'd love to have those versus the ones that this policy is really there to protect when there is a cyber incident that impacts, hundreds, if not thousands of individuals. So the $1 million is going to go by real fast. If you look at cyber attacks or cyber policies that have been triggered, whether it's at Home Depot, Target, City of Atlanta, things of that nature, those numbers get pretty astronomical real fast. And so that's why, even though it's $1 million, it's a lot of money. That's why the insurance coverage or the insurance requirements are usually set at that limit. Because the downside is pretty significant for the insurance companies once you get past that $1 million.
And that makes perfect sense to me. I guess the other question I would ask is there are there operations costs that we would incur that are not covered under this insurance policy if we had an attack like this? I mean, are there?
Yes.
I mean, could we have $5 million worth of cost and only cover $2 million of the? I mean, is that?
Well, it would depend on what kind of costs they are and if they actually fall under the insuring agreements of the policy. So it would be on a case-by-case basis as to what those costs might be.
For example, Don, I would assume that the opportunity costs of our fare system being affected or a collection would not be covered. So
Correct.
lost fare revenue would not be covered under this kind of a policy.
Okay, so there are things in there. And how do they define an occurrence?
It's specific to the policy, just like all insurance policies have a specific definition of occurrence. And I can get you the specific definition, but it would be an incident that occurred sort of within a finite period of time, I guess, that we would determine that, yes, we've been breached, and here's when we think it happened, and then they would identify that as the occurrence itself. So I can certainly get you the specific definition from the policy if
Typically,
you'd like.
Mayor Floyd, it involves a third party getting access or control over some portion of our system that has a negative impact. To be overly broad, and I'm not saying that's the language in the policy, but that's typically what triggers these types of policies. And I think Donna may have touched on it, but the other thing, you know, because of the world we live in today, it's becoming more and more difficult to even, you know, find insurance carriers for cyber insurance because the numbers that get paid out make it such a loss for these companies. So it's hard to get a much better deal than what Marsh is suggesting they can get right now.
Rita?
My question is in regards, because this is not unique to MARTA. It's unique, well, not unique, but it's required by mass transit, period. So in comparison to MARTA's transit size and other transit agencies, where are we in regards to the amount of money we're talking about?
I don't have that information readily available. I can certainly do some comparison for you, but I don't have it readily available.
Because I know with cyber, we also, if necessary, have to convert to a different system as far as internet and anything else that we utilize. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I believe we go onto, like, for instance, the police department has if there is a cyber attack, they have a separate system, computer system, that they revert to. And I believe MARTA security system is also a part of that and reverts to it as well.
So I would just jump in here and just say, I'm sure we have redundancies. I'm not sure we want to go into the detail of those redundancies.
All right. That we don't want to talk about, okay. But in comparison to other transit agencies, I believe that the price is comparable, so that's why I'm asking that question, really.
Certainly, and I can certainly get you some information. I just don't have it readily available.
Thank you.
Stacy?
Good morning. Quick question. So with the limits, we are pretty much, doing a 50% increase in the limits from a year ago. What is the main driver? Like, is there the likelihood of an event happening, or why such a significant increase?
Well, historically, probably 5 years ago, we had $20 million in limits. And then when all of these different losses started happening within the marketplace over the last several years with, Log4j, Microsoft, all these different aggregation events that occurred that were spread throughout the world through this aggregation exposure that's people are now aware that it's out there, the market tightened up and dropped out. Really, the bottom dropped out of it. So after that happened, we could not even get, we could only get $5 million in limits, where we used to have 20 million. And we couldn't get anything but $1 million retention. So the marketplace reacted to all of those losses because insurance is driven by losses. So they reacted to that and cut capacity and cut the coverage available. And now things are getting a little better. Some insurance companies are re-entering that market space, so they're willing to put their capital at risk. And so now that we do have a little bit of market stabilization, it's just time to try to re-increase our limits because, as Peter was saying earlier, the loss can be, while it is a lot, I agree, but if we ended up with an 18 or a $20 million loss because of a cyber event that happened because something came through, on a piece of contract or software or something, then, we're only going to have $10 million in limits, and we're going to be self-funding the rest of that. So it's just a way to try to have some sleep insurance out there so that it can mitigate the loss to whatever level that we can. So that's really why.
Okay, thank you.
Sagira?
Thank you. Quick question back to the occurrences. Sorry, this is just for my edification. What happens if there are multiple attacks in a certain time period? Is that defined as an occurrence? I know you don't want to get too much into it, but just thinking, sometimes people will breach and attack multiple times. So is it based upon a time period, or is it based upon each individual occurrence?
I would honestly want to look at our current description specifically before I answered that question, just so I'm not speaking out of turn. But in knock wood, we have not experienced one of those at MARTA. So having not experienced the claim process of it, I would have to go back and look at it specifically. But it could be a time period, but it would be governed by what the occurrence language is in the policy itself.
Okay, you have the question before you. Let's go ahead and vote on the resolution. The resolution passes. Donna, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Kirk, you ready to take us home with 3 resolutions? The first resolution is going to be one authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of Solar Winds annual maintenance and upgrade support, IFB B50300. Kirk Talbot.
Thank you, Chairman Durrett, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, members of the Business Management Committee, and respectfully, I think you jinxed us by saying it would not be an interesting conversation this morning. It's all right. I'll try and bring it back to the more mundane. Next slide, please. Requesting respectfully this morning authorization to award a contract to Tobias International for a 3-year term in the amount of $260,682.15 for maintenance and support of the Solar Winds product. For those not familiar with it, the Solar Winds product is one of the tools that we utilize here at MARTA to help us track all of the events that happen on our network. Not just the bad ones, but the ones that are yellow warning lights, check engines, and contention, low disk space, that sort of thing. So the benefits of Solar Winds are we use it for troubleshooting, monitoring performance, noting when we need capacity expansion. We also use it for troubleshooting security issues, events, thankfully that Donna has hopefully not jinxed us with mentioning that we've not had any majors so far. But it's also utilized for generating compliance reports and for additionally troubleshooting and doing audit responses. Next slide, please. Procurement considerations. We went out for a bid on this, as Solar Winds is a commercially available product, but there's multiple people that resell it. You can see that we had 21 firms that retrieved it. In June, we had one bid that was found to be responsive and responsible from Tobias International, and the Department of Internal Audit has conducted a price analysis and determined that it was a fair and reasonable pricing. Next slide, please. This is being procured 100% with local operating funds for the 3-year period of time. Again, the amount is $260,682.15. And there was 0% DBE goal on this procurement, as there are no subcontracting opportunities. It's simply a pass-through of the maintenance and support from Solar Winds themselves. Next slide, please. So I'd like to respectfully request authorization to enter into this 3-year contract with Tobias International.
Thank you, Kirk. I'll entertain a motion and a second to consider this resolution. Properly moved and seconded. Questions or comments? I'll offer one thing. 15 cents?
15 cents.
Really? Okay.
We can't control the market.
Okay.
One quick question.
Yes, Bill.
Is this a requirement of the cyber insurance we were talking about before?
It is not a requirement, but as noted, presence of tools like this and utilization of tools like this increase our cybersecurity maturity, which then ends up driving down the price that we pay in the market. She noted that our score of maturity went up from year to year. It's because of utilizing tools like this.
Okay, thank you.
Rod?
Yeah, so I understand that there were 21 firms that retrieved the solicitation, but only one bidded on it, so you have a single bidder on this, is that right?
That is correct in my understanding.
Is that kind of unusual?
Unusual is a tricky word. It's not uncommon in the sense that for commodity contracts like this, a lot of them are simply procured off of state or federal GSA contracts.
Yeah.
The vendors put out their best pricing on these contracts. And when you go through an independent procurement like this, there's more of a lengthy process for the vendors. So it's not uncommon for vendors to say, let me look at this information. Okay, the dollar size amount, the scope, it's not worth going into an independent contract.
Okay, okay. And then my next question, the company Tobias, do we have a relationship with them now?
I do not believe so. Do you know, Jacqueline, if we have a relationship with Tobias International.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, not seeing any more questions. Let's go ahead and vote on the resolution before us. Resolution passes. Kirk will go to the next one, which is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for maintenance support for Cisco SmartNet devices and Cisco ISE RFPP P50362, utilizing the federal GSA and State of Georgia contract.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a request, next slide please, for authorization to enter into a contract with NetSync in the amount of $754,085.69 for a 3-year contract to do 2 things. One is to provide maintenance and support on our network equipment provided by Cisco. They lovingly refer to that as a SmartNet. And that's all the equipment that connects our stations, our fiber, our CCTV cameras, whatnot. And the other piece is to acquire a 3-year license for ISE, which is the product by Cisco that is their identity security tool, which allows us to see who is connecting to the network. Validate that it's a known person, validate that they're on equipment that has been cleaned and scrubbed. So it's kind of a TSA, if you will, when people plug into those network ports to make sure that we have high security. So the Cisco SmartNet provides us the ability to get replacement parts, software upgrades, patches, security fixes for all of our network equipment, and it also that we can call into when we've got troubleshooting and technical issues. The ISE, as I stated, is software that allows us to make sure that anything that connects to our network anywhere meets our requirements and our standards. And again, this is the sort of thing that drives down the cost of our cybersecurity. From a procurement standpoint, we are replacing a contract that we have right now that expires in September. The prior contract was for 2 years at $1 million, and you'll see that we're actually recognizing a significant cost savings on this contract renewal, utilizing the State of Georgia contract mechanism. Next slide, please. From a financial standpoint, you'll see the cost breakout. The 3-year maintenance and support of the equipment is $647,462.77, and that will be coming out of our operating budget. The licensing, as you see, is $106,622.92 for the 3-year period, and that is coming out of our technology capital budget. I do want to point out, as mentioned earlier, that this cost decrease represents a 49% cost savings over what we were on our 2-year contract. So we had a 2-year contract for roughly $1 million, and here we're going to a 3-year contract for about $754,000. From a DBE standpoint, there was no DBE goal assigned, as this is utilizing the State of Georgia contracting mechanism. Next slide, please. So I'd like to respectfully request authorization to enter into this contract with NetSync in the terms and period stated.
Thank you, Kirk. I'll entertain a motion and a second to consider this resolution. Properly moved and seconded. Are there any questions for Kirk? Rita?
What was the reason you said there was no DBE goal?
Because we're utilizing the State of Georgia contracting mechanisms, all of the people that have competed have already done so through the state. Certainly.
Collie, we couldn't get the trains that we purchase in future years to be 50% less expensive than the ones we're
Unless we got 50% less trains.
Okay. We'll call the question. Please vote. The resolution passes. And Kirk, we've got one more resolution coming from you to authorize a modification in contractual authorization for professional services for the redesign of the Decentralized Active Directory Environments, LOA L39801.
Thank you, sir. I'll bring this home with One more on the cybersecurity theme. Next slide, please. This is a request for increase in authorization on our existing letter of agreement L39801 in the amount of $53,000. This is a professional services contract that we entered into in 2017 with a firm that is redesigning our network. So if you go back to the conversation about cybersecurity, one of the things we try to do is we try to segment our assets. So you put your fare collection system on one network. You put your CCTV systems on another network. You put your main printers and copiers and payroll on a third network, so that if somebody were to enter into one of our networks illegally and breach it, they don't have access to everything. They just have access to the systems that they're going after. This project began in 2017 to take our singular network and start to break it into the appropriate groups. Today's request is to add this $53,000 so that we can break off some additional pieces that have been identified in the process, namely the police system, so their computer-aided dispatch, their asset management, the rail network, and portions of other operations that we're trying to keep separate. Next slide, please. So the benefits of continuing this redesign and segmenting better are it reduces our risk and liability by not putting all of our eggs into one basket. It decreases network vulnerability for cyber incidents because you're only getting into a portion of the network and you don't have as much exposed at any one time. It decreases our operational maintenance costs because we can do work on a smaller part of the network. We don't have to do the entire network simultaneously. And it increases efficiency by decreasing the time to restore services. So if we were to have an incident, we would have to restore services on that portion of the network. If you have one network, it spreads farther and you have more to restore. So it speeds up that process. Next slide, please. From a financial considerations, you see the history of the contract. It was originally awarded in July of 2017. And this final request here is the $53,000 increment, which would take us to $249,325, which is why we're bringing it to the board at this point in time. There is no extension of the timing on this. We're anticipated to conclude this project by the end of this calendar year, so end of December this contract will be expiring. It's just additional scope that we've identified and are therefore asking for board authorization. From a DBE assignment, there was no original DBE goal set on this as it was a letter of agreement and there are no modifications being made as we're continuing work with the same firm. Next slide, please. So I'd like to respectfully request authorization for the additional $53,000 added to this contract amount.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion and a second to consider this resolution. Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Rod?
Yeah, it strikes me as interesting that we're somewhat decentralizing operations when at one time the philosophy is to put everything together for centralization and efficiency. So now we're going back in that direction again. So with the separation of all these different functions, how does that impact software updates? I mean, you got to update this software and that one there, and then they're not quite all connected in a way. Does that impact that?
It does and it doesn't. Almost all of our software updates are automated. What it means now is instead of running a process to automate the software across one network, we have to automate it on the first network, then the second, then the third. So there's an additional step, but it actually benefits us from the standpoint if some error is introduced. If you've got one network, you've just impacted your entire network.
Sure,
Whereas if you introduce an error now, you might critically bring down one system, but you don't touch anything else.
Sure.
So it's naturally more beneficial. It's a little bit more work in that respect, but there's a lot of benefits that come out of it.
Okay. Well, so I can understand that. I guess my concern is that once again we do this, and you understand how it needs to be done. But then what happens is we say we have firewalls that stop this from happening, and I thought that was the reason why we moved in this direction. So
Correct.
I'm just interested to see how it works out. But anyway, at the end of the day, will this list end after this expenditure? I mean, will that be all that you're going to decentralize, or we're going to?
Our expectation is yes. Unless
Okay.
we introduce a new type of asset that we've never had, we expect that this structure will serve us for the next multiple years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So you've got a crystal ball that we don't have access to. Seeing no more questions, then let's go ahead and vote on this particular resolution before us. Resolution passes. Kirk, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Colin, let me say, you've got an outstanding team that came and presented mundane stuff in an exciting way and made me eat my words. So well done.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, team.
Thanks, everybody. We will call this meeting to close. And Al, are you up next, or who's up next? Stacy, you're up next.
First, first item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from the July 27th meeting. Could I get a motion and a second, please? Waiting.
Too bad Kirk left the room. We could blame him for this.
Motion has passed. All right, second item on the agenda, Ms. Melda Hickman, resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for final design services of the track isolation integrity monitoring system. Ms. Melda.
Good morning, Chair Blakely, Chair Powers, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha. I'm requesting resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals excuse me, for final design service of track isolation integrity monitoring system, RFP P50067. Next slide, please. Track isolation integrity is related to corrosion management. Billions are spent nationally on this issue with huge sustainability and environmental impacts. Straight current is responsible for a large portion of the corrosion damage that occurs on electrified rail transit system. We have a self-contained 750-volt DC power system that is subject to straight current through multiple components. And as you can see, key locations along MARTA right-of-way, the rails, switch machines, passenger platforms are affected by this straight current. Moving to our purpose, next slide, please. Moving to the goals. Proposed design is for monitoring system for early detection of straight current issues. The monitoring will be set up for 24/7 capabilities to pick up all system load conditions with real-time location of issues, historical trend documentation, and communication. The project will also directly align with state of good repair requirements. Next slide, please. Now here we are at the purpose. We are wrapping up preliminary design and are now ready to solicit for final design services. Along with the standard scope, we are looking for national expertise specific to this program. Next slide, please. Design service cost is estimated at $750K based on the 30% cost estimate of $5 million for implementation and overall project cost of $8 million. Following procurement phase, the consultant will perform the design next year, and we will take over the installation and implementation throughout the system, concurrent with other system-wide programs. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion will be reviewing the DBE participation once we are approved to move forward with this procurement. Next slide, please. I'm requesting resolution authorizing solicitation for the proposal of final design services of track isolation integrity monitoring system, RFP P50067.
Thank you, Melda. Could I get a motion and a second, please? It has been properly moved in second. Any questions? Mayor Floyd.
Yeah, when this thing goes off, what do you do then?
At the time, when it goes into alarm or what have you, sir, it will be we get notification through either the IOC or persons who are monitoring at EP&E will be monitoring the system. And so what happens is that we'll get some information, and then we'll have employees go out to the track to investigate, do an inspection, sir.
Okay, but how do you fix it? I mean, if it's corroding, how do you fix it?
Well, that's the elusive part right there, because when it comes to corrosion, to determine what the area that this the alarm has gone off in, we'll more than likely go out and just do a visual inspection to see, and if we have to do a replacement, we'll do a replacement or repair.
It could be components like insulated joints, just bolting down your track, taking care of loose debris that's in the area that's causing the corrosion to jump. But to Melda's point, the first thing is to know it's happening. That's when you talk about what keeps you up at night, it's a system with 38 stations and not knowing where the next emergency is going to crop up. This keeps us ahead of it, and it allows us to, in our own time, get the right experts there to deal with the IJ issues and the installation.
Okay, is this covers all the rail that we have?
Yes, sir.
So it's anywhere, it could happen anywhere.
That's correct, sir.
So to show you my limited knowledge, pipelines in the ground have the same kind of problem.
Yes.
But we put systems on them to prevent it from corroding. Why aren't we doing that?
Well, that's what we're moving towards right now. Right now, we are actually working with AGL, and because they're having their issues on their system. So we have data loggers along our systems right now in 9 locations that are monitoring and providing some analytical information for any issues that we're having. And so we're working with them, and they are also doing the same as looking at their system too.
Right now, if we've got a problem out there, we have to see it. Somebody has to walk by and look at it and see.
We have to do an actual inspection or look at the data and see what actually the area that we're having these issues, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
No further questions? Let us vote. Looks like we're missing one person. Who are we missing? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, resolution authorizing the disposal of a permanent easement to the city of Brookhaven in support of the city hall development by Mr. Jacob Ballo.
Good morning, Chair Powers, Chair Blakely, Vice Chair Powers, Mr. Greenwood, and Mrs. Rocha. Here to present a resolution authorizing the disposal of a permanent easement to the city of Brookhaven in support of the City Hall development, MARTA parcel C3229H. Next slide, please. So in June of last year, the board approved a resolution authorizing the execution of a ground lease with the city of Brookhaven for the purpose of building a city hall on our property at the Brookhaven Oglethorpe Station. You see the city hall located at the yellow area on the exhibit to the left, and the city hall design has been progressing. The city is looking to break ground in October. And as they advance design and continue due diligence, they've come back to us to request authorization to enter into a permanent easement for the purposes of the sanitary sewer line, which you see in black on the exhibit to the left, which would run from the City Hall all the way to Dresden to connect into the sewer system there. The the speed at which this transaction is moving is relatively quick, so we have not completed the appraisal. It'll likely be completed at the end of September. But in order to move the project along, we're coming to the board with a floor value of $205,000. In the event that the amount is in excess of it, of course, we'll transact at that amount, but we wanted to make sure we brought a conservative number to the board as the city continues to refine its design prior to us going to issue an appraisal. The other thing, on Tuesday of this week, the Brookhaven City Council passed a resolution providing for up to $1 million for the payment of this easement. They wanted to make sure that they at least had the ability to go up to that threshold to accommodate this easement and keep the project going. So this was fully diligenced by our internal stakeholders, not only the real estate team, but also the engineering team and the operations team. As you can see, the sewer line runs right in front of the station entrance there on the east. So there's a lot of coordination that's required among not only the internal stakeholders here at MARTA and the city of Brookhaven, but also there's notice requirements in the documentation to make sure our patrons don't have a disrupted experience as they come to use this station. So with that, I respectfully request authorization approving the resolution. Resolution authorizing the disposal of a permanent easement to the city of Brookhaven in support of the City Hall development, MARTA parcel C3229H. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Are there any questions or discussion for Jacob this morning? Mr. Durrett.
Sure hope it comes closer to $1 million.
I'm sure they don't, but yeah, that's right. Thank you, sir.
No additional questions? I'll call the vote. The motion has passed. Thank you, Jacob.
Great, thank you all.
Excuse me, Stacy. I've got a question for Jacob, but it's unrelated to what we just dealt with. Where's the parking for their city hall going to be? Are they going to end up taking the parking that is in front of the station, between the station and Peachtree?
They're building underground parking
Thank you.
underneath City Hall. Yes, sir.
Ms. Paula Nash, come on down. Next item on the agenda, a briefing of the DBE performance for the construction contracts. Ms. Paula Nash.
Good morning again. Now I am here to actually do a presentation on the major contracts for the infrastructure and construction contracts. You may recall back in February, I provided a briefing on the DBE participation on the major planning contracts, and then we promised to come back in about 6 months and cover the other major capital program contracts. So here I'm here to do the infrastructure and construction contracts. Say that fast 5 times in a row. Next slide, please. So the purpose of providing this briefing is to be transparent, give transparent information on DBE participation as well as goal achievement, DBE goal achievement. Next slide, please. So I think all of you have in front of you a handout which kind of gives more information on each contract that we're going to talk about, but this is just a summary of the major infrastructure contracts and the DBE goal assigned to it and the achievement for the DBE goal achievement for each of these contracts. This is as of June 30th of this year, 2023. So this is the DBE goal achievement as of June 30th. For, no, just for that time period, we asked them for the invoices from that time period, or the payments from that time period. And this is a good time for me to point out, when we look at DBE goal achievement, we go by actual payments. So it would have been payments made through June 30th of 2023. They may have outstanding invoices that weren't counted in this, because we don't look at invoices, we don't look at what they plan to achieve by the end of the contract. It is what has actually been paid to the primes by MARTA and what has been paid to the DBEs by the primes. Yes. So this is over the life of the contract, but up to June 30th of 2023. So next slide, please. This is our major construction contracts. Again, it's showing the DBE, the overall DBE goal, as well as the DBE goal achievement. And you see these construction contracts include our CMAR, station rehabilitation, elevator and escalator, emergency trip station, 5-point BRT design services, and our track renovation phase 4. Next slide, please. So, and as I mentioned earlier, your actual handout has more details on that contract, as in the actual dollar amounts that have been paid out to the prime, the actual dollar amounts that have been paid out to the DBE sub-consultants. But I just wanted to sum all of that up by saying, looking at all 20 of those contracts, and there were 20 contracts there, 50% of the individual consultants are in fact meeting or exceeding the assigned DBE goal. I wanted to highlight a couple that were highly exceeding the DBE goal. One is Chasm Architecture, and I want to point out there that Chasm is a DBE prime. And so that's why when you see that they are doing 93% or 93% of the money has gone to a DBE, it's because Chasm itself is a DBE prime. Also wanted to point out that HNTB shows 84% of DBE achievement on their contract, and that's incredible. I do want to point out that they're doing an incredible job. We do expect that as they get more task orders, it may even out some, but I did want to point out that they are one of the contracts that's doing exceptionally well as far as DBE achievement. And that is, HNTB is on more than one contract, so that one is specifically systems engineering services. 25%, so that was 50% that are exceeding or meeting or exceeding the goals, which means 50% are not meeting or exceeding the goals. Of that, 25%, the reason that they're not meeting or exceeding the goals is that they are relatively new contracts, just getting started in the work. And so some examples of that in the highlights you have are the consultants that have zeros next to them, and that's simply because they have not been paid anything by MARTA, nor have they paid out anything. They have started the work, but it hasn't gone any further than that. They're brand new projects. Similarly, you will see that there are contracts that are in the single digits, and likewise, those, when you look at the total dollar figures, you'll see that they are just starting out those projects as well. So 25% is because they're just starting out the projects. I want to highlight one contract, and that is the 5 Points transformation with Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, who are showing that they're doing 8% out of a 31% goal, and $3 million has already been paid on that contract. And the reason I'm pointing that one out is the 5 Points transformation actual scope of work has not really started. They're just getting to the beginning phases of that. So in the meantime, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill has been given other task orders that they have been doing that are being paid out of the same contract number, but they're not part of that scope of the 5 Points transformation. So the 8% DBE goal is a reflection of they haven't really started the 5 Points transformation project yet, but when they do, we expect that number to go up and them to reach their goal, the actual goal achievement of 31% as that project progresses. The last 25% are those that still aren't meeting the goal, but they are in what we would consider acceptable ranges. So you see on your handouts that there are contracts that are at 17% out of 25%. There's some CMAR related contracts that may be at that are at 20% or over 20% of a 25% goal, and those we consider that to be acceptable ranges. They will also go up as time progresses. We have talked to those firms. They are expecting new task orders, and as these new task orders develop, they will also be more DBE work that they will be doing as well. So those numbers will go up as well. Overall, this group is doing well as far as the DBE achievement. Those that haven't gotten there yet, they do have plans in place to get there based on the upcoming work that is coming. Next slide, please. So just quickly, what do we do when we notice a deficiency? We require the primes to provide reasons why they are not meeting the goals. This has been done in all of these contracts. Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, are very easy to note because they're just getting started. But even those that have been going a minute, we've asked them about what has caused them some delays. Some have been just changes in the scope of the work. So we take notes of that because chances are that they can make up the difference later on. But if they're not, we want to know that there was a reason that they wouldn't be able to meet the ultimate goal. And we also want to know just so that if there's anything that our office could do to help them along in this way in making the goal. We also ask for corrective action plans if they're needed. So what we do to reinforce the DBE, the importance of DBE usage in achieving the DBE goal is we try to reemphasize that in every opportunity that we have. So we have numerous events. We reemphasize that at the events. We reemphasize it through the procurement process as we are meeting with the different companies. And then we have specific events that I've highlighted here. Inclusion Matters, which is an event where we focus actually on the primes. And through that process, we reemphasize, as we're explaining the DBE program, we reemphasize the importance of DBE participation. And we also have the DBE Roundtable series, which is where we're actually meeting with the small businesses or the DBEs and talking to them about different issues and concerns that they have, but also the emphasizing that it's important for MARTA that these DBEs and small businesses be given opportunities and reemphasizing that point there. And lastly, we come here and report to the board, and we feel like that doing that on a regular basis sets a tone for the primes that are working on our contracts that this is a serious matter to us. Next slide, please. And that is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Questions? I see Ms. Segura-Jones.
Thank you for the presentation. Follow up to those corrective actions or those, so if a company does not reach those DBE goals, how does that factor into future bids or contracts?
So we don't actually have within our contracting process, we don't take points against them. But obviously knowing that they are not meeting the goals, because you're hearing these reports, when the decision is here before you, you do have that information.
So to put a finer point on it, legally, we can't hold them, we can't deduct points because they didn't meet a goal. It's not a, it's just a goal. It's not a requirement. Otherwise, it invalidates the whole scheme, statutory scheme. So that's the most direct answer I could probably give you.
And I think what this effort does is it takes that question out of anecdotal to evidence-based knowledge. So whereas in the past we may think that a certain contractor is not holding true to the promise, now we'll know, they'll know, we'll know, the board will know. It'll be, you know, I think this becomes an iterative process. If we see that over the years they continue to fail, then it begs the question of what do we do next? But this is that first step.
Ms. Rita, just really quick, point of privilege. I know that you're involved with a committee in the discussions of this being a suggestion versus a requirement. Has there been any more movement on that?
That's a good question. As she was asking that, I made a note to myself to reach out to the congressman whom this committee falls under.
Okay.
Because there are bills in Congress to make sure that instead of the DBE conversation being a goal, that it becomes a requirement.
Okay.
So I will make sure to reach out to the congressman whom the committee, he's over that committee.
Is that for the state of Georgia?
It's going to be for federal.
Federal, okay.
Period.
Great.
So it's a congressional.
Okay.
So if you use federal funds, it'll be, DBE will be a
Okay.
requirement as opposed to a goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rita. Mr. Durrett?
I don't know if it would be helpful, but I'd like to explore it a little bit. We get we can't see the forest for the trees. We come and we talk about specific contracts and DBE goals for that contract, that sort of thing, and I'm just wondering if it would be beneficial for us to have a broader view so that we can see if you calculate the DBE participation from one year to the next, to the next, to the next in aggregate, does that tell us something about how we are doing and how the contracting community is doing so that we can see, hey, we're going in a good direction, we're flat? I don't know how much value comes from that, but I'd be curious to explore it to see if maybe value does come from that kind of a lens, pulling back.
I think I understand what you're asking, and yes, we can try to put something like that together to see.
Don't do brain damage just because I asked the question, but I'm curious, you know, overall, how are we doing year over year?
Yeah. Paula, that's the kind of information that you do collect. You're just trying to figure out how to package it
For us,
for
yes.
a trend analysis.
Yes, so I collected, I collect that type of information for the FTA, but it's a global, it looks at how we've done for a semi-annual period, and then they look at the whole federal fiscal year period, how we've done, what our overall DBE percentage has been for that year. So,
I think you've already done it then.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure if that was exactly where you, okay.
Just let us see what that is.
Sure.
Mr. Pond?
Good report, Paul. In business, they say what gets measured gets focused on. So,
Yes.
good report. I've got a question. We have some very large operational and maintenance contracts, and I don't suggest you do this for all of them, but the larger ones. But you take the mobility contract, and there's some other very large maintenance and operation contracts. So will we be seeing this same kind of reporting for these other types of contracts?
If that is what you all would like to see, and I take that as a yes, then yes, we can look at some of the large operations contract, major operations contracts as
I think
well.
that's up to executive management. I'm just asking the question, so.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Al. Ms. Rita?
A comment in regards to the DBE roundtable. I think it has been very effective. And DBE meaning minority businesses, women included. And so listening to some of the women-owned businesses that are participating in the DBE roundtable, I think has been very beneficial as far as some of the concerns and their concerns that they have brought up to us at the roundtable. And I think we've had some corrective action that has helped their businesses and help us get to a point where we should have better participation, and that those that are participating will be more satisfied with our reaction. So I wanted to make that comment in regards to the DBE roundtable. I think it's those of us that have been there have really heard some concerns, and I think the action taken has alleviated some of those concerns.
Yeah, I agree. Thinking of anecdotally of the last DBE roundtable, there was, I put Carrie on the spot and asked her to speak to this, but there was a particular organization that felt that they weren't being heard or seen, and so we asked them for 24 to 48 hours to take a closer look at this issue, and from what I recall, Carrie was able to make some significant changes there.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, Ms. Scott. Through the roundtables, we have been able to hear directly and a little bit indirectly when somebody pulls you aside and says, hey, I have an issue here. But it's given our DBE firms a forum to get to leadership. And quite frankly, in the last one, we did hear of, we had someone pass along a laundry list of things that hadn't had responses. By Monday morning, I think this was on Friday afternoon, by Monday morning, we had them in a Teams call, and we were able to address most of those issues. It's ongoing, and we are working on a change order for that particular DBE firm, but had we not been sitting there and hearing that directly, we wouldn't have been able to help this firm. So those are the great opportunities that Paula and her team are providing us, being able, with that forum, and yourself and Ms. Blakely as well. Your support for that has been tremendous, I think, for our firms. So it's good.
We expect it to grow in the future.
Absolutely. Just a final comment and question in this regard. So I know that we've spoken about providing, updates to those who have participated in the past, as well as like when we have amazing steps like this being made forward. Have we been able to update prior participants just to keep them abreast of what we've been able to implement, and, just really to let them know that we appreciate their time? Because as small businesses, anytime we take out chunks of time to, give our input, like that's.
So we have been able to update the past group of participants for the DBE roundtable. In fact, I was just in an event where several of those participants were in the event recently, and they realized that a new group of small businesses were part of the current roundtable event. So they said, well, are we out now? Do we not get to be a part of it anymore. So they really appreciated that event and clearly want to be a part of it. And so I let them know then that as we have these events, what we accomplish, the issues that come up and what we accomplish will go out to all of the participants, from the early participants
Right.
to the current participants, so that they're always a part of the group.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
We appreciate that briefing. It was great. Are there any other matters to come before the board, before this committee?
I have,
Ms. Rita?
I have a question that has come up to me. And my question, and let me know if it's not part of planning and capital programs, but where are we with network redesign as far as our goals are concerned all over? Is that part of planning and capital programs, I believe?
The bus network?
Yes.
design?
It's a fair question inside the forum. So the question is, we're on schedule. We've said that since 2024, we will actually start to roll out the service as redesigned. You'll recall we came to the board and passed the level of ridership network, the percentage of ridership network that we were in support of. So that moved forward, and I think we were at 70 to 75% ridership, if memory serves me correct. So that's what we're doing. The next milestone was to have some community engagement, more community engagement about it. The team had gone out to do just that, but we didn't get the level of feedback that we thought was sufficient, so we said we'll try again. So we're in the throes of re-inviting community representatives and constituents to that process. So that's where we are.
So we are on goal, we're on task.
We are on
of
task.
where we expect it to be based upon this time frame.
Correct.
Because, and one of the reasons, too, I'm asking is because I believe Mr. Frierson and myself was in a meeting over the weekend, and one of our MARTA committee members mentioned that in her district, there had not been any community meetings regarding bus network redesign. So I did commit to asking where we were on all of it, where we were goal-wise on all of our bus network redesign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with the delay in community engagement, how is that gonna affect our schedule?
Our schedule's still unchanged. There's a point in time in the continuum of engagement that we wanted to get to the community again. This would be round 2 with the community. We could have gone ahead as scheduled, but we thought that the numbers were low. Certain communities just hadn't responded, so we had to step it up in terms of knocking on their doors. But the overall, there's a shift to the right in that portion of the project, but the overall goal is not shifted.
Okay.
And, I'll remind the room that what we said right from the beginning was, yes, we have a goal in mind in terms of when we would be implementing the service, but far more important to make sure that we bring everyone with us. So that goal may shift. We won't apologize for that. It would shift because we need everybody to be on board. So, but at this point, it hasn't.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Jennifer?
Just a follow-up to that. Is there a dedicated email for people that want to give input on the rework?
There was a website. There was a bus network redesign website, and I'll have to check if no one in the room has the website recollection up front, but we'll get that back to you. But there was definitely
Ms. Mellanax is moving.
Do we? Yeah.
I'll email it out to everyone today. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will MARTA Reach have any role in the rollout of the bus network redesign?
At this point, we anticipate that it'll be a part of the overall product where the whole point of REACH was to do a pilot so that we'd know if there was feasibility for this type of micro transit, if you will, in the whole scheme of things. So yes, without preempting the process, I would say at this point, it's very much, it's alive and well in terms of its ability to participate in the overall network. So as we grid out to the extent possible for a high ridership network, we realize that there will be some quote-unquote transit deserts that need to be addressed with a smaller solution, and that at this point, that seems to be the one.
Are there any additional questions? If not, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Operations and Safety Committee meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the July 27th minutes. Can I get a motion and a second? See a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a first and second. Can we please vote? Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for procurement of pest control services for MARTA vehicles. And that'll be led by Sean Thomas, Director of Operations of Facilities. And that'll be almost exciting as some of this IT stuff, right?
Yes, sir. I try my very best. Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, and Operations and Safety Committee members. My name is Sean Thomas, Director of Facilities, and if I may, I'd like to bring your attention to agenda item number 2. And this is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of pest control services for MARTA vehicles. Next slide. The purpose of this agreement is to continue this recurring service agreement, which focuses on a single aspect of techniques utilized to minimize the presence of pests on our fleet of revenue vehicles. This contract supports 2 of the authority's strategic initiatives, improving the customer experience and promoting MARTA's image and brand. Next slide. Again, this is a recurring service agreement, and it was established to prevent the presence of pests on revenue vehicles. Many of these pests are problematic in certain temperature or humidity conditions or other specific environments, like those within close proximity to municipal storm or sewer drainage systems. Our intent is to prevent these pests from migrating onto our revenue vehicles using specific EPA-approved chemicals like gels, powders, or concentrated liquids. And this is used to treat the crevices and voids of our fleet of vehicles. Next slide. Some noted service enhancements on this agreement include we increased the service frequency on the fleet of buses from quarterly to monthly. This slide here, the image to the left, shows the web portal that we use to help us track trends with pest infestations. And that helps us to measure, analyze, and respond accordingly to different types of incidents on our vehicles. And there's also some enhancements with respect to utilizing or the availability of the safety data sheet information that that notes the EPA-approved chemicals that are used in certain vehicles. And last but not least, extending the treatment areas to the areas outside of the passenger cabins into the exterior crevices of the vehicles. Next slide. So this service agreement allows for scheduled service visits based on these vehicle quantities. However, it should be noted that the mobility vehicles remain in this agreement as a contingency because they're also included in a separate contract agreement for mobility services. Also, this contract includes provisions for a specific number of emergency service treatments for different unforeseen circumstances. Next slide. This solicitation was advertised on April 20th of 2023. 25 firms retrieved the online solicitation. The deadline for bid submission was established as May 23rd. And the authority received 3 bids prior to the bid deadline. The lowest responsive and responsible bid was received from the incumbent of the current contract, which is Terminix International. Next slide. The bid received from Terminix International was for $574,688, and this is for a 2-year base term with 2 one-year options. However, this represents a increase of 48% over the current contract, which again is largely attributed to our request to improve services by increasing the frequency of the treatments on our fleet of buses. But I should note that the unit prices per vehicle have remained consistent on both contracts. The DBE goal of 10% was established for this contract. However, this firm has committed to 12% as part of their good faith effort with utilizing their identified subcontractor. Therefore, I respectfully request authorization to award contract proposal B50304 for the procurement of pest control services for MARTA vehicles to Terminix International in the amount of $574,688. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Can I get a motion and a second, please? All right, moved by Williamson, seconded by Blakely. Any questions for Sean Thomas? Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Ms. Williams.
Is it just for the vehicles or are the stations included as well?
This contract is just for the revenue vehicles. We have a separate agreement for the facilities.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Jones.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Thomas. For the mobility buses, why less frequency for service?
So those, one of the reasons is less people on those vehicles, and also too, those vehicles are, the pest control services for those vehicles is actually part of another agreement. So we just kind of have it here as a contingency in the event that we need to do something to make it more consistent.
Okay, any other questions? Not, can we please vote? The motion passes.
Thank you, sir.
The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing a contract for the procurement of police ballistic vests and carriers. And that'll be led by Major Chavlis Salters of the MARTA Police Department.
Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. My name is Chavlis Salters, and I'm a Major of Police Administration with the MARTA Police Department. May I direct your attention to agenda item number 3. This is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of police ballistic vests and carriers, IFB B50297. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, the use of a firearm against an officer is one of the most dangerous threats that we can face. Unfortunately, there is no such thing as bulletproof vests. However, ballistic-resistant body armor is designed to protect the torso of the wearer against bullet penetrations and the blunt trauma associated with the impact. The vest is designed to slow the bullet down, causing it to turn and eventually mushroom as shown in the picture. Other protections provided are vehicle crashes, fragments from explosions, and falls. Next slide. Body armor is critical safety equipment because it protects us from assaults. Over the past 3 decades, the use of body armor has saved the lives of more than 3,000 officers in the line of duty. That's more than 3,000 families that didn't have to suffer the anguish of death or debilitating injury to a loved one in the line of duty. The National Institute of Justice reports that officers triple their chances of survival when wearing ballistic protection, and many times can remain in the fight after being struck in the vest and have a shorter recovery period. Next slide, please. The invitation for bid process began July 3rd and ended July 31st. 4 bids were received. Gauls was selected as the lowest responsive and responsible vendor, but Gauls is also our current provider. Next slide. So in summary, officers are assaulted every day, and the benefits of body armor are obvious. body armor saves lives, which is why we have a mandatory wear policy in our general orders, and it's part of our standard issued equipment. Body armor does not last forever. It expires 5 years from the date that it was manufactured. So each year we will have different groups of people who will need vests replaced when they reach expiration. Our contract expires next month. So this new contract will provide for purchases for replacements and for new hires as we fill out vacancies. These purchases are made on an as-needed basis to ensure that we use the vest for the majority of the warranty period of 5 years. So the quantities included would be up to 350 our standard issue vests and about 115 vests and accessories for special operations. And this is up to the amount of $455,805 for 2 years. So there were no ballistic vest vendors in the DB directory and no opportunities for subcontracting. So I am respectfully requesting authorization to enter a contract with Gauls LLC for the procurement of police ballistic vests and carriers in the amount of $455,805 for 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Salters. Could I get a motion and a second? Moved by Durrett, second by Williamson. Any questions for Major Salters?
Quick question. I'm sorry, Rod. No, go ahead. These things, say, have a 5-year lifespan.
Yes, sir.
Is there some sort of liability if it's 3 years, if you get shot and it doesn't work? Is there some sort of liability there?
Well, that will fall back on the vendor. That's why we have the warranty of 5 years.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Bryson?
Yeah, I'm just curious, how much does a vest weigh? Like 10 pounds, 15
Typically,
pounds?
yeah, it can go up. Typically, the lowest they've made a lot of improvements can be 3 pounds up to you can have maybe 15 pounds. It just depends on the technology in the vest. It also depends on the weight of the vest. You know, they come in different sizes, small all the way up to maybe triple XL, and the technology that's involved. So.
Okay. And so are the vests universal? I mean, you just buy them as you need them, or are they custom fitted?
They are custom fit. They're tailor-made. Just like a suit, you go and then you buy the vest and then get it tailored to you.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Blakely?
Thank you. Quick question. I know that you said that they were the lowest and most responsive bidder. So I get, sometimes we choose the lowest bidder, but are they the best? Because you guys need the amount of protection. I mean, I would be willing to spend a little bit more to make sure that you guys have the best protection.
Yes, ma'am. Our scope of work includes standards set by the National Institute of Justice. So they met those standards, and they are our current providers. So we do like the flexibility and the weight of the vest that they provide.
Okay. Anything else?
One question.
Yes.
Are they gender specific?
Yeah, so you have gender neutral, you have male and female.
Thank you. Very important.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Any other questions? Can we please vote? The motion passes. Thank you, Major Salters. The fourth item is a resolution authorizing a contract for the award of procurement of non-revenue vehicles, and that'll be led by Anthony Morrow with the General Superintendent of Bus Maintenance.
Good morning. Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, and members of the Operator Safety Committee. I am Anthony Morrow, General Superintendent of Bus Maintenance. May I direct your attention to agenda item number 4. This is for the procurement of non-revenue vehicles utilizing the State of Georgia contract. Next slide, please. Today we're going to discuss, the current fleet, vehicle availability, electric vehicles that I'm excited about, our regular fleet, and then a request. Next slide, please. If you're having a little bit of deja vu and say, didn't we just do this last year? We did. And this is why. If you take a look at the left slide, the left of the slide, that is our past practice of how we purchase vehicles. As you see, in several years we'll buy a lot of vehicles, and then some years we won't buy any vehicles. What we found out that is very inefficient, and it also placed the authority at some slight risk if there's an issue or recall with any of the vehicles that we do purchase. What we would like to do moving forward is to purchase virtually 7% of our fleet per year, every year over a course of 10 years. This is a lot better way to do business. It minimizes any type of risk of any recalls or any kind of issues with the vehicles. And we can budget a lot better knowing how many vehicles we're going to get every year. Next slide, please. Also, take a look. This is our police fleet. They are my largest customer. As you see, in 21 and 22, we didn't buy any vehicles. In 2018, we bought 37 vehicles. Looking at police, we do know that they need about roughly 10 vehicles per year. As you see, in 2024, it includes those 10 vehicles plus some EOD vehicles that we're going to talk about on the slides coming up. Next slide, please. The market is still recovering. Things are not pre-COVID, but they're better. So that's why I'm back here again this year, because I can't really say what I'm going to purchase over the next 5 years because I don't know what the market's going to do. So until the market really recovers, we're going to be doing this year to year, but then we'll be confident of what the market is going to be in the next 5 years, then we'll come back with a longer request so we don't have to be coming back every year. So for right now, you get to see me, and I get to see you. Next slide, please. Electric vehicles. This is an electric cargo van. This is at our Browns Mill facility. We had a show and tell that our departments came down and just take a look and see how you like it. It operates just like our regular gas vehicles. As you look at the inside, this is a typical setup for our facilities department and our EP&D department. They are able to take all the equipment, stick it inside the van, and go in, you conduct business on a day-to-day. Next slide, please. The other electric vehicle we're going to be purchasing is going to be the Ford F-150. Operates just like a standard pickup truck. These are going to be used by facilities and EP&E. That's electrical power and equipment, if you don't know. Next slide, please. Some of the benefits of electric vehicles, biggest thing is 0 tailpipe emissions versus 33 pounds of CO2 emissions over a gas vehicle. And the cost per 25 miles is $1.73 versus $4.50 for a gas vehicle. You can see the annual cost for a gas vehicle is $2,700 a year versus $1,000 a year. And these numbers are from the fueleconomy.gov from the EPA. Next slide, please. Over the course of the next 10 or the next 7 years, or going over to the 2030, we are committed to having 25% of our fleet being electric vehicles, 0 tailpipe emissions. As you see the top of the slide, this is how many current gas vehicles we have. You see that number decreases per year, and our electric vehicles increases per year. We also going to keep the hybrid option in there for purchasing vehicles, and that's mainly for our police fleet. Right now, there's not a fully electric vehicle that works for our duty cycle. Next slide, please. The other vehicles we will be purchasing, right now we still do have a need for some gas vehicles. These can be used by the Office of Facilities, EP&E, and also our new Department of Heavy Cleaning. And we also purchasing some F-350s for our police EOD fleet. And just the regular patrol vehicles, because police, they need vehicles every year because they have the second hardest duty cycle of the authority. The hardest duty cycle is our bus transportation. They're doing 30,000 miles a year on those vehicles. But we've already bought vehicles for them last year, so they're okay for at least another 2 years. Next slide, please. This details the vehicles that we're purchasing this year and the cost breakdown. As you can see, the electric cargo van is a little pricey, but over the course, the savings are there. And electric F-150 is about $16,000 more than the F-150. But over the course of a 7-year breakdown, the cost per mile savings versus the maintenance cost that we're using, they pretty much almost neutralize. Next slide, please. This request is going to be split between Wade Ford and Allen Vigil Ford. Ford Motor Company, they details which dealership in the area sells which vehicles. That way, so no one vehicle in Atlanta, no one dealer in the Atlanta area has 100% of the business. So that's why it's split between Wade Ford and Allen Vigil Ford. And the crest is going to be for $1,757,216. And with that, I would turn it back over for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marr. Could we get a motion on the second? Okay, we have a Motion and a second. Any questions from Mr. Marr? Yes, Ms. Jones.
Thank you for the information. You had a slide that detailed the range for the electric vehicles. What is the typical, I guess, range that they're used during the day? Will it impact any of their services?
The typical range for the cargo van is about 120 miles. That is, perfect for us because we don't go more than that. And with MARTA chargers going to be at every location, it basically point-to-point charging. They'll charge at night. They'll go to the different location. Then they'll charge while they're there. They'll then make it basically from one MARTA facility to the next MARTA facility.
Any other questions? Can we please vote? The motion passes.
Thank you.
The next item is a briefing for the electrical bus fleet charging infrastructure led by Daniel Heck.
Hey, good afternoon, Chair Pond, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, members of the Ops and Safety Committee. I'll be giving a presentation on MARTA's electric bus fleet charging infrastructure plans and options, and this is a follow-up briefing to last month's request for authorization to procure new Flyer transit buses. Next slide, please. So MARTA has committed to transitioning away from traditional fossil fuels to environmentally responsible vehicles. This is a high-level overview of that transition timeline. By 2024, next year, we will have 7 depot and 1 on-route charger completed. By 2030, we will be on our way to 25% of our transit bus fleet will be battery electric. 2035, we expect about 63% of our transit bus fleet to be transitioned to zero tailpipe emission vehicles. And by 2040, we'll be at what we call the fleet of the future, which is an environmentally responsible and sustainably fueled bus fleet, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Next slide, please. Our path to electrification is dependent not only on the vehicles, but the chargers and electrical energy provided as well. So we determine the type of charging, the locations of those chargers, the planning, design, engineering, and the construction of that charging infrastructure. There are, of course, budgetary impacts and the cost associated with all of that work and the construction of the charging. And as we noted last month, our fleet can transition only as quick as chargers are installed. And of particular note, this affects the entirety of bus operations from planning, route design, spare ratios, and how we dispatch our vehicles. And these assumptions are being incorporated into the bus network redesign and ongoing capital plans that we discussed earlier this morning. Next slide, please. Today I'll talk about 3 types of charging infrastructure. The first is depot or plug-in charging. This is adopted by many of our peer agencies due to the lower initial cost of installation. We're limited to 120 kilowatts to each bus, largely due to the cable connection type. Power requirements at our divisions, 20 megawatts for Perry, up to 40 at the New Clayton facility. Buses need to be plugged in for about 3.5 to 4 hours for a full charge from a 20% state of charge. So software is required to determine the state of charge for each bus, range, and compatible routes. And this is where our dispatchers will look at a vehicle and determine what its range is based on the software. And then we can determine what route to put those buses on so we don't have a bus die on route if it's a 200-mile route. Next slide, please. The second type of charging is pantograph charging. And this is where a retractable pantograph extends down to contact charge rails on the roof of each bus. Higher power, 220 kilowatts for each bus, largely dependent on the battery type. Higher power requirements associated with that at the divisions as well. And buses need to remain connected for 2 to 3 hours with a long-range battery and pantograph charging. Obviously, overhead structures are required for this, but these charge rails on the roof of the vehicle are also usable for on-route charging, depending on what type of battery type we have. So the 6 electric buses we have now, the 40-foot buses, those do have charge rails on the roof. The 6 60-foot articulated buses used for Summerhill Rapid will have charge rails on the roof as well, so we're leaning toward this type of charging technology. Next slide, please. Third type is inductive charging. You all may have seen some of this. This is in-ground inductive pads, advertised charge ratings up to 500 kilowatts, no moving parts, or very low maintenance. This is where a bus will stop over a dedicated spot, like your phone, it'll charge with no wires. But this has not yet been incorporated into the bus designs that we are procuring, and the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineer Standards, are not finalized yet. They're under development, so there's no industry-wide standard for this charging. So we're watching this, but we're not moving in this direction at this time. Next slide. So I talked about 3 types of charging. I'll talk about 2 types of batteries. The first is long-range batteries. These are high-energy batteries. Charge time to a 90% state of charge is about 210 to 240 minutes. Maximum range is 190 miles for a 35-foot bus and 150 miles for a 60-foot bus. These have lower initial cost, and the routes are not dependent on having on-route chargers throughout the network. But due to the limited range, we call what's less than 1 service day. The bus will go out, and when it hits its maximum mileage, it has to come back to the division to charge and be plugged in for that length of time. Also of note, this requires extremely high power requirements at the bus facilities. For example, Clayton County facility design with 300 or so buses will utilize the energy equivalent of 10,000 average-sized homes. That's 50 megawatts, estimated at $18 million substation required, similar to the substations we have on our heavy rail system. And that's just to charge those 300 buses. Next slide. So the second type of battery is a fast-charging battery. These are higher power batteries. We expect the future to have increased capacity on both battery types. A charge time to a 90% state of charge, only 10 to 15 minutes at 450 kilowatts. The range is lower, 120 miles for a 35-foot bus and 90 miles for a 60-foot bus. Higher initial cost. We have to put chargers throughout the service area and our facilities. Theoretical unlimited range. The buses charge at the bus facilities and during layovers. So this is where a bus would get to the end of its route at a rail station. Charge rails come down, top off the battery pack, operator uses the restroom, passengers deboard, get on, then they hop on, bus is ready to go all the way to the end of the route. We do that all day. This does require lower power requirements at the bus facilities. So Clayton, using the same analogy as earlier, will have electrical requirements equivalent to 800 average-sized homes, and the additional energy required would be dispersed throughout the system. There's some redundancy and some backup built into this as well. Just like if a substation goes down on a rail system, we have them throughout our system. We can backfeed. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket with one depot having all the chargers here. Next slide, please. So I'll talk briefly about our current service plan and what that means with battery electric buses. On this graph on the bottom is the number of vehicles and how many miles they run per day on average. So the current battery electric bus range with long-range batteries is about 180 miles. Looking at how long our buses run each day, only 27% of our current routes would allow using low or high-power depot charging batteries. That means 73% of our current bus routes require either on-route charging, the bus goes back to the division and swaps for another battery electric bus, or we modify our bus service plan to have shorter routes that would allow for battery electric buses to operate on more of our routes. Again, bus range increases as battery technology advances, and this is being incorporated in bus network redesign. Next slide. So I'll talk about pros and cons of the fast charge strategy and the long range strategy. And this blue line on the left is fast charge, on the right is long range. Pros of fast charge, again, unlimited service range, lower power requirements at the garage, provides charging during power outages. This is where we have redundancy throughout our service network. The routes must lay over at an overhead charger, so that constrains where we put routes in the future. There's a higher cost with multiple installation sites, and the on-route chargers are not secured. Long-range strategy, it's pretty much the opposite. Lower initial cost. Construction is constrained to the bus facilities. They're secure location. The routes are no longer dependent on the chargers since they're being charged at the divisions. But again, limited service range. Less than 1 day, additional buses are required. High power requirements required at the bus facilities, and limited charging during power outages, so there's a risk associated with that. Next slide. So I discussed MARTA's fleet of the future. Now, what does that look like? The first priority of the fleet of the future is an environmentally responsible and sustainably fueled fleet. The second priority is a reliable and diverse fleet, which prioritizes our vision of people taking people where they want to go. When I speak of a diverse fleet, I'm specifically referring to varying propulsion types, and I have those listed here. It's a combination of battery, electric, fuel cell, potential hydrogen combustion. We are looking at bio and synthetic fuels and also next generation clean fuels. And third, it's a future-focused fleet. So MARTA invests in vehicle technology that best serves our customers. And as each of these technologies matures, we'll reevaluate our purchasing strategy and our fleet goals. Next slide. So here is a timeline of the fleet transition. The bottom in blue is focused on the vehicle and vehicle procurements. The top in orange is the charging infrastructure timeline. So in 2023, as last month, we have a new bus contract that began. We've committed to no further diesel buses being procured. In 2024, we'll have 6 chargers commissioned at Laredo Garage, with our first en-route charger commissioned at Candler Park. By 2025, we'll have 45 chargers commissioned at the divisions, with another en-route charger at Carver Station. That goes up to 135 chargers by 2030 to support that 25% battery electric bus goal. 2030 to 2040, we'll put depot chargers at all of our bus facilities with en-route chargers throughout the system, and we are already incorporating this in some of our station redesigns. So Bankhead, for example, that's assuming that we will have en-route chargers in the design of that station re-envisioning. And again, 2040, we'll have our fleet of the future, which is depot chargers commissioned at all facilities and en-route chargers commissioned at most stations, dependent on our charging strategy and the fuel type that we procure. Next slide. Thank you, and I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you, Daniel. Great report. This is not a resolution. It's just for information, appropriate for you to ask Mr. Heck any questions. I'll just lead off to say that this is a very strategic point in changing over the bus system, and the decisions we make today will impact MARTA 10 or 15 years from today. So it's not a light decision, and it's not a small decision to decide the types of buses we need for the future. So any questions for Mr. Heck? Yes. Ms. Scott.
Just one quick question. First of all, thank you so much for the briefing. I assume that this will be compatible with the buses that we expect to purchase from New Flyer?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
The first en-route charge is commissioned at Candler Park. Is that because of its proximity to Laredo as far as where the buses need to, or when the buses need to charge?
Yes, and also based on the service requirements at that division. We'll prioritize the stations that have a large number of buses going there, that we can maximize the charging at those.
Any other questions? Under other matters, you've also been provided the information for the 23 June key performance indicators. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? If not, the meeting's over.